Welcome to Insider, ILTV's news analyst program. I'm your host, Calev Ben-David. On assuming command of the Israel Defense Forces earlier this month, Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir told his top officers that 2025 will be a year of war. And so far, events are proving him right. With the breakdown of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, the IDF has resumed operations in the Gaza Strip. The government saying only military pressure on the terror group will lead to the release of the remaining hostages. This, in turn, has led to Yemen's Houthis resuming their daily fire of ballistic missiles on Israel. Fortunately, so far, none of them have broken through the country's air defenses. Conflict also continues between IDF forces and Palestinian militants in the West Bank, concurrent with terror attacks such as the one this week that claimed the life of one Israeli. And the launching of rockets at the northern town of Metula calls into question whether Israel's truce with Hezbollah will hold. So once again, Israel is fighting a multi-front war. The question is whether there is a clear strategy to reach an endgame that will restore Israel's military deterrence and bring the hostages in Gaza back home. And with me to discuss this today is Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves Maurice Hirsh. He's the director of the Initiative for Palestinian Authority, Accountability and Reform at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. He's also the former director of the Military Prosecution for Judea and Samaria. With us all is Reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Doron Avital. He's the former commander of IDF Special Forces and a former member of Knesset. And Doron, let's start with the basic question, whether this was the right time for Israel to renew its operations in Gaza, and is it doing anything fundamentally different there in order to bring about a resolution, the freeing of the hostages, the elimination of Hamas?
Yeah, I think in the end, when we went into this new maneuvering, I mean, the claim was that we are doing it in order to release the hostages, in order to create the required military pressure that we can cash into some kind of a deal. So I think it's yet to be seen that we'll succeed. I mean, we have to try it. We have to try it with the Egyptians, because there's a few offers that Witkoff with the Egyptians are trying to build in. I think in the end, we have to understand that we have some common interest with the Egyptians concerning Gaza, and they become the key player. So we have to see, again, under the constraint that we are not thinking of occupying Gaza and taking command on Gaza, which is not the mission that the government decided upon. How we succeed to create from this military pressure the result that we want, the release of the hostages, and then in the end to see Gaza without Hamas. And this can be achieved either militarily or by some kind of, some kind of agreement that would be decided upon in exile, whatever, that was offered by the government, but until now was refused by Hamas leadership.
Maurice, so your view on the question, you could, of course, respond to what Doron has said, but there is one thing we should note that is different, and that is the change in the U.S. position. The changing from the Biden administration to the Trump administration has mean Israel has, so to speak, a green light to take firmer action against Hamas. At the same time, there seem to be some mixed signals with Steve Witkoff, this U.S. Special Envoy, now suddenly talking about seeing some talking about maybe Hamas having after it demilitarizes, having a political role in Gaza. How to read those mixed signals, and of course, your response to what is Israel's really goal here?
I think, Calev, you actually touched already on one of the main elements of the continuing conflict. That's a change in the position of the U.S. administration. What we saw with the Biden administration was seemingly a bear hug for Israel, which really did hold us back at all different points along the path of the war. The mission into Rafah that we saw, or we didn't see, that got held up for many months last year. And now the change in the position and really the exposure that whilst giving Israel the bear hug, the Biden administration was also really funneling billions of dollars through US aid into the same mechanism that was fighting against us. And so now we're seeing that change both on the military side, giving more support to Israel, providing us with weapons that had been held up by the Biden administration, and also giving really giving a red light to all of the aid that was going into fighting against us, the financial aid that was going in to fight against us. And now we're seeing also a change in the Israeli position from the US position that demanded that we constantly continue to fuel Hamas with food, with fuel itself, so that it could keep on fighting, using the humanitarian aid to sell off to the impoverished population, to keep its coffers running. We're seeing now also that change in that position. All of those together means that today we're in really a different position than we were just 2 months ago. And we can now go ahead with really applying the maximum pressure to these genocidal terrorists to force them to release the hostages. We're talking about 536 days into the war, 59 hostages that they could release at any second and really bring about a substantial end to the war. But that's the decision of the terrorists. They want to continue holding the hostages. That's their leverage against Israel. So just on the last point that you mentioned, I find it hard to believe that Israel will agree in any constellation to Hamas remaining in any type of governance position.
Even a demilitarized
area.
Hamas
Hamas is Hamas. Their charter still requires the destruction of Israel. And there is no real difference between the military side and the political side of Hamas. It's a terrorist organization that advocates for the destruction of Israel. So why would we agree to leave them in any type of governance position?
Well, I want to get your response to that, Doron, because you said the Egyptian plan, you see, which even now Witkoff have said there are some elements of it that seems to suggest some kind of, it's almost unimaginable role for Hamas, but if it lays down its arms, it frees the hostages.
First of all, there has to be, you mentioned the idea of an end game to the game.
Right.
I mean, you have to think that in the end, we can't get any hostage deal if there's no end game at sight. When end game means the end of the war in some capacity. So, and this is where we were in the beginning, before we entered this, to this new maneuvering of the army inside Gaza. So I think, I don't know where can you cut the line between what we call a political Hamas or a civil Hamas, but in the end, somebody has to govern Gaza. It would be, and to do it without participation of the Palestinian Authority, I think nobody would accept it, not the Egyptian, nor the Emirates, whoever would introduce those forces inside. And in the end, we want to see Gaza demilitarized. We want to see the military leadership outside. And then we can decide who that is in this far association with Hamas can stay. But this is I don't think this is the main question. The main question, Gaza without any military capacities, and somebody who governs Gaza, which is not us. It should be clear that the only alternative to whatever we're considering now around this table is to take Gaza, command Gaza, have a military occupation there. And this is something we don't want, because it's something that the capacity that we can't allow ourselves in this context, and we don't want to go back to those circumstances. So the only partner that we have in this game in the end is Egypt, the Emirates, and the other moderate Sunnite countries that we are trying to find some resolution to Gaza. But we have to think in this constructive fashion.
All right. Well, it's a lot of unanswered questions, but clearly freeing the hostages, that is
exactly
the main goal here.
As regards Egypt's position, I would suggest really much caution. Egypt has for a long time been playing a double game. We know now that Egypt allowed and facilitated the digging, the tunneling of really dozens, if not scores, of tunnels from Egypt into the Gaza Strip.
I would be very careful to say that they did it.
We know that
deliberately for sure not.
We unfortunately know that Abdel Fattah Sisi's son was in charge of that area, and there was a financial gain to be made from that area.
I would
just suggest caution about the Egyptian position, which has been very militant and even threatening towards Israel, threatening a breach of the peace accords because of the actions of these genocidal
I just want to let...
This is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. I want to say one word. I mean, we don't want to risk this great milestone in the history of Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict, and this is the peace treaty with Egypt. Egypt, of course, is a country that was our enemy for years, and of course they don't. The peace is a little bit, pretty much cold, whatever. But this is a milestone that we have to keep, and whatever we do in Gaza, we have to keep it in mind.
All right, gentlemen, I'm sure we could keep on discussing that point for well beyond our time. But let's move on to another key front, and that is the renewal of air attacks by Yemen's Houthis on Israel. Every night, Israelis being woken up even though none of those missiles has gotten through the air defense, it's disrupting life here. It's disrupting Ben Gurion Airport. Here, it's quite different what the Americans are doing. They're telling Israel, we'll handle it. You step back. They have been launching almost daily attacks there. But it's Maurice, you had an interesting tweet today. It's time to make Yemen into Gaza. What do you mean by that? And how is that possible if it's the Americans who are taking the lead and Israel being asked to stand down now, in a way they were asked during the first Gulf War against Iraq?
I think what we're seeing with Yemen, and here we have to just redefine some of that introduction, Calev. We are seeing the renewal of the Iranian attacks using the Yemeni proxy against Israel. That's the definition that we have to understand, because that's really what's going on. We have no beef with the Houthis. We have nothing to do with the Houthis. We wish them as the bracha for the Tsar in Fiddler on the Roof. God bless them and God keep them far away from us. That's what we want to see. We have no interest in Yemen. Let them enjoy the rich Jewish history that Yemen had for centuries and leave us alone. And really we're seeing the Iranians forcing the Houthis to continue their attacks. And what we need to do is also on that front, Yemen needs to be given the example of Gaza to say, if you do not stop your terror attacks, if you do not prevent Iran from using you as a proxy to attack Israel, you're going to end up like Gaza, you're going to end up like Lebanon. And that's also we've seen as a change in the approach of the US administration under President Trump, going away from the pinpoint strikes that they'd carried out. Let's not forget, there is a UN Security Council resolution which justifies the use of force in Yemen against the Houthis.
Do you agree with the current U.S. position that the U.S. should be handling this matter and Israel should be standing out for the time being when it comes to retaliating to these missile attacks?
I believe that Israel should take responsibility for its own security. For a year and a half, we have been kept out of and really restrained from returning fire in Yemen. We've done it just twice. The Egyptians that we were just discussing were an integral part of that restraining of the Houthis, even though they really did cut their nose to spite their face. Anything to allow the Houthis to continue attacking Israel, even at the loss of billions and billions of dollars through maritime traffic through the Suez Canal. Israel needs to take responsibility for its own security and attack those who are attacking us, whether it be in Yemen or whether it be in Tehran itself.
And your response to that?
We have to be very careful, in the way we present those things to the audience. Listen, we are in a coalition game, and we are part of a coalition. If you don't get it, we are going to lose this war, and Israel is going to... the history of Israel wouldn't be as we want it to be. Part of the coalition is the distribution of powers, the distribution of missions. And I think right now it's done in a perfect manner, in the same sense that you mentioned the Gulf War, in which, by the way, I was supposed to be the commander commanding the northern western Iraq region and commanding and trying to
right, there was talk of Sayeret Matkal, your unit, going into Iraq.
I was deputy commander, and this was my command post, and then we got this this veto from the US, and we didn't do it. So there is no veto for Israel intervention in Yemen. We showed that we can do it. But in the end, we have to understand that we have a limited capacities. We have the West Bank, which is really, at least in the north, a hub of terror. We have Lebanon, that we have a very careful and fragile ceasefire that we have to maintain. And we have Gaza and our hostages. So we have to be very careful how we distribute our forces and our capacities. And I think the way it's done right now with the US and the coalition at large, also the British, is very important. Let's play this game carefully. A war is not won by rhetoric and words and harsh words. A war is won by measured moves, smart moves, intelligence, and in the end, forced when it's needed.
A brief response, Maurice. Yeah.
And yet, while we rely on our partners for their defense, every day it is Israelis who are really in mortal danger from these missiles getting through. And we, our government, our army, needs to protect us from that threat. It isn't something that we can constantly rely on others. They do not feel the immediacy of the threat. They do not face that mortal danger. And therefore, it's something which with all respect to our partners, we need to be an active
I want to say it's more than a partner. It's a coalition game. We have to understand what's going on in this conflict as a sort of a coalition game that we are part of, and we have to play with our partners smartly and introduce the best intelligence and the best cooperation in order to win this campaign. This is a big campaign, not to undermine the challenge that Israel is that stands before us.
So clearly difficult strategic questions dealing with this multi-front war, gentlemen. And let me take you to another front where I think it's also some difficult choices to be made, and that is in the north. We have seen on the past week a renewal of some rocket fire. We're not even sure from where into Metula. We see the Israeli defense forces operating and attacking parts of Syria. That also, some disagreement between Israel and some of its allies. Should Israel be taking these strikes into Syria now that there's a change of government there? And should it begin negotiations with Lebanon on the northern border that are supposed to begin while we're still seeing some fire from that direction?
So I definitely think that with Lebanon, we should be moving forward towards some type of peace agreement. We have no fight with Lebanon. We retreated from Lebanon entirely in 2000. We can maintain that northern border without the presence of Hezbollah and the Iranians as a peaceful border, and really for the benefit and the prosperity of both countries. And that's something that we should be working towards. The question is there a new Lebanese leadership, government that's capable of really reining in Hezbollah and all of these terrorist forces that have managed to plant themselves in Lebanon? It would appear that that is the direction that they seem to be going in. Just a tweet from Nawaf Salam, the newly appointed Prime Minister of Lebanon, that says, we've paid a high enough price for the actions of Hezbollah, and we're not interested in that continuing on. Possibly Lebanon has understood that it just isn't worth attacking Israel.
Possibly, but I'm not sure Hezbollah has understood that, and some other elements in Lebanon. And again, there is the question of Syria. How should Israel approach Syria? Should it be still launching these offensive strikes into Syria at this time?
As long as we have to defend our interests in places where we don't feel there's a central command, sure. But in the end, it's not like that we prefer a Syrian state which is unstable and which terror organizations participate there. We would have preferred a central government, the same way we would have preferred it in Lebanon, that have one law, one weapon. Is it possible in Syria? With Syria is going to head into this direction. This is a challenge nobody can predict. But as far as what we can do now is really work out on our interest, the buffer zone and things like that, and places where we think that the weaponry can fall into hostile hands, terror organization, whatever. So here I would preach also caution. And the same thing goes for Lebanon. I think the campaign in Lebanon, unlike the campaign in Gaza, which wasn't an easy campaign, was conducted brilliantly. And in the end, we succeeded really to collapse the Iranian, Hezbollah, the Iranian hold on Lebanon. Whether Lebanon can really follow into a direction of one weapon, one law, this would be something that we want. We have a long history of Lebanon. We should play it careful also there.
All right, gentlemen, we are coming to the close. As I said before, there were even other fronts, continued Palestinian terror that, for example, we saw an attack this week. But let me ask you this question. Ayal Zamir saying 2025 is going to be a year of war. But what about even 2026? Do we see any light at the end of the tunnel on the entire multi-front conflict that Israel is facing? And as you say, Maurice, the head of the snake, Iran, that's still not being dealt with.
Well, so the question is really how far we can go with progression with Iran and stopping their control of these proxies, whether it be Hamas, whether it be the Houthis, whether it be Hezbollah. That progress, I don't think we're seeing the kinetic war against Iran starting yet, but I think there are a lot of different plates moving around, putting more pressure on them. If you follow the value of the Iranian rial, which really did plummet entirely, they've lost a tremendous amount of income. The currency is worth nothing. That financial stronghold around Iran is tightening all the time. And it's something which I think we're going to see playing out. And so really the question is, how quickly do we move from the stage of maximum financial pressure to maximum kinetic pressure, both against the Iranian nuclear project and against the Iranian really puppet mastery of all of these different proxies.
And Doron, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Is there we see new tactics from Israel? Is there a strategy to at least restore Israel's deterrence and close out, to some degree, these conflicts?
Sure, I want to believe that it's possible. Of course, we should take into account also the divisive, the division within Israeli society that makes it hard to create a coherent strategy going forward. This is not an easy task, and we have to admit it even also here. But of course, I want to see an end game to Gaza, an end game without Hamas, with our hostages back, and the hostages back, this is the main mission. And when this ends, then we can think of the other fronts. But I think we also have to create some positive focus to the region, and the positive focus in the region has to do along what we call the old Biden IMEC, or the second floor of the Abraham Accords, to create this corridor, the normalization with Saudi Arabia. But then we have to understand that players like Egypt and Jordan are our partners to this corridor. And if we'll create this vision, a constructive vision, a positive vision to the region, then we might also win over our enemies. But it has to go hand in hand.
All right, gentlemen, that's all the time we have for this program. It's nice that we're ending with a positive vision. Let's hope we see that, and let's hope we see, of course, most of all, the return of all the hostages still being held in
all
Gaza.
Together and in one batch, not in drips and drabs.
Maurice Hirsh, thank you for joining us. Doron Avital, and thank you for joining us on this edition of The Insider. I'm Calev Ben-David for ILTV.